My fiancée mocked my career as a plumber, so I started my own company, bought her dad's house at Foreclosure, and told them at Christmas dinner. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've taken pride in being a plumber. It's not glamorous. It's not the kind of job that makes people gasp with admiration at parties, but it's honest. It's what pays the bills. My dad was a tradesman, my grandfather too. Working with my hands feels like carrying on a legacy, and at the end of the day, when I've fixed someone's broken pipe or prevented a flood, I feel like I've done something real. When I first met my fiancée, Emma, I thought she saw that in me. She was sharp, stylish, and came from a family that screamed old money. The kind of people who wore designer suits to casual dinners and sipped wine I couldn't even pronounce. Still, when we started dating, she said she loved how down-to-earth I was, and I believed her. For a while, things felt good, like maybe love really could bridge the gap between two different worlds. But over time, little cracks started to show. I noticed how she avoided mentioning my job when we met her friends. She'd say things like, "Oh, he works in the housing sector," instead of just saying, "He's a plumber." At first, I laughed it off, thinking maybe she just wanted to sound fancy. But the truth is, those omissions stung. One night, while we were getting ready to go to her cousin's engagement party, I overheard her on the phone. She was talking to a friend and laughed, saying, "Well, at least he doesn't smell like pipes tonight." She said it like a joke, like it was nothing. But standing there in the bathroom doorway, adjusting my tie, it felt like someone had shoved a knife into my chest. I told myself it was just one comment. Just nerves. Just her being playful. But deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The first time Emma crossed the line from subtle avoidance to open humiliation was at a dinner with some of her college friends. We were sitting around this long oak table at a trendy Italian place downtown, soft jazz playing, candles flickering against polished wine glasses. I was already a little out of place in my work jacket, while everyone else wore blazers and dresses. When the waiter asked me what I wanted, I joked lightly, "As long as it's not as expensive as fixing a clogged toilet, I'll be fine." I thought I was being funny, trying to fit in. Emma smirked, then leaned forward and said, "Well, he would know." Toilets are basically his specialty. The whole table laughed. Some laughed awkwardly, trying to be polite, but others actually chuckled like it was the punchline of the night. My face burned. I tried to laugh along, but inside, I felt about 2 inches tall. Later, when I confronted her in the car, I said, "Why would you say that?" "You know, it embarrassed me," she shrugged, scrolling on her phone, not even looking at me. "Relax, it was a joke. Don't be so sensitive." But it wasn't just a joke. It was the way she said it, the way she dismissed my entire career with a single sentence. That moment played in my head on repeat for weeks. I kept telling myself love means compromise, that maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. What hurt even more was how her friends looked at me differently after that. Every time I spoke, it felt like they were humoring me, waiting for the plumber guy to say something simple so they could smile politely. That night, I realized something. Emma didn't just avoid telling people about my work. She was ashamed of me, and that shame wasn't going to stay hidden for long. The first time I met Emma's parents, I could feel the weight of judgment before I even stepped through the door. Their house was massive, white pillars, a driveway lined with expensive cars, the kind of place you only see in magazines. I remember wiping my hands on my jeans before shaking her dad's hand, already feeling out of place. Dinner was set like a formal event. Silver cutlery, wine glasses lined up in perfect rows. Halfway through the meal, her father leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine like he was interviewing me for a job I wasn't qualified for. "So," he said, his voice carrying that polished arrogance, "plumbing. Is that stable?" I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Emma stayed quiet, her eyes locked on her plate. I swallowed hard. "It pays well, and there's always work. People always need plumbers." He gave this little smirk, glancing at his wife. "Yes, but is that really a future? I mean, fixing toilets your whole life?" My chest tightened. I wanted to defend myself, to tell him that plumbing keeps cities functioning, that without people like me, his mansion would flood in a week. Instead, I just nodded. because I didn't want to cause a scene. What cut the deepest wasn't his words. It was Emma's silence. She didn't defend me. She didn't even glance my way. She just let her dad tear me down like I was some small-time handyman trying to impress royalty. On the drive home, I finally asked her, "Why didn't you say anything?" "You know how that felt," she sighed, like I was a burden. "He just wants the best for me." Don't take it personally, but how could I not? That night, staring out the car window, I realized I wasn't just dating Emma. I was dating her family's expectations. And they already decided I wasn't enough. The night everything boiled over was at one of Emma's cousins' dinner parties. The place was packed. Polished wood floors, glasses clinking, the air filled with the smell of roasted lamb and expensive perfume. Everyone there seemed to be either in finance, law, or some corner office job. I already felt like the odd one out, standing in the corner with a cheap beer in hand while they all sipped wine. We were mid-conversation with a group when one of her friends asked me casually, "So what do you do?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Emma beat me to it. With a laugh, she said, "Oh, he's just a plumber. Not as fancy as you guys with your big offices, but hey, someone's got to unclog the toilets." The group laughed. Some politely, some genuinely, but my face burned hot, and my chest tightened like I couldn't breathe. I looked at her, waiting for her to wink, to show me she didn't mean it. But she didn't. She smirked, proud of her little punchline. Later that night, when we got home, I finally snapped. "Do you even realize how humiliating that was? Do you even hear the way you talk about me?" She rolled her eyes, kicking off her heels. "You're overreacting. It's not that deep. Honestly, I don't want to have to explain to people that my fiancé spends his days elbow-deep in pipes. Can you blame me?" Her words cut sharper than anything her father had said. This wasn't just about a joke at my expense. It was about respect, and I realized she had none for me. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stood there in silence, feeling something inside me harden. That was the night I understood. This wasn't just love with a few cracks. This was a relationship rotting from the inside out, and things were only going to get uglier from there. After that dinner party, the tension between us thickened like smoke you couldn't escape. Every conversation turned sharp, every silence heavier than the last. A week later, it all came to a head. We were sitting in her apartment, the glow from the TV flickering across the room, though neither of us was watching. Emma turned to me suddenly, her arms crossed. "I need to be honest with you," she said. "I can't see myself marrying someone who's..." Stuck, I asked, my voice tight. She sighed like I was a child who couldn't grasp something simple. "You're a plumber, Jake. That's not a career, that's a dead end. If you loved me, you'd consider something more ambitious, something that makes sense for our future." Her words hit like a hammer. I stared at her, trying to process the person sitting across from me. "So you're saying I need to give up the trade I've built my life around? For what? To impress your friends?" She didn't flinch. "I'm saying either you change, or I'm not sure I can go through with this engagement." The air left my lungs. This woman I had once believed would stand beside me through everything had just drawn a line in the sand, and I was on the wrong side of it. I stood up, pacing the room, my voice shaking. "Do you even realize how insulting this is? Do you realize how much I've sacrificed to make us work?" She shook her head, almost bored. "Jake, I don't want to spend the rest of my life embarrassed." That was it. The final nail in the coffin. I grabbed my jacket, my hands trembling, and walked out without another word. Out on the street, the cold air hit me hard, but not harder than the reality sinking in. The woman I loved saw me as nothing more than a paycheck that didn't measure up. And in that moment, heartbreak gave way to something else, anger. That night, walking away from Emma's apartment, I felt hollow. My chest ached, my hands shook, and for the first time in years, I wondered if I really wasn't enough. Her words echoed in my head like poison. "Plumbing isn't a career. It's embarrassing, but the more I replayed it, the more something inside me snapped. Why was I letting someone who never lifted a wrench in her life define my worth? Why was I begging for respect from people who couldn't survive a day without people like me?" The next morning, I woke up with a fire I hadn't felt in years. I didn't just want to prove her wrong. I wanted to prove to myself that I was more than her narrow view. I decided I was going to take everything I knew, every late-night emergency call, every skill I'd learned from the ground up, and build something bigger. My own company, it wasn't easy. I spent weeks drafting plans at my tiny kitchen table, scribbling figures on notepads, researching licenses, and saving every penny I could scrape together. I stopped going out, skipped takeout, and worked overtime jobs to pile up enough cash. My friends noticed the change. One of my buddies, Mark, said, "Man, you look like you're killing yourself." I just smiled. I'm done being underestimated. It's time I bet on myself. The days blurred together. Sweaty shifts fixing pipes during the day, paperwork and planning at night. I was exhausted, but every time I thought of Emma rolling her eyes at me, it fueled me. Her dismissal wasn't just a breakup, it was my wake-up call. I didn't know exactly how far this plan would take me, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being ashamed of what I do. And soon, the world would see that too. 6 months after the breakup, my life looked nothing like it did before. My small plumbing business had gone from a scribbled idea on a notepad to 3 vans on the road, a small office, and a growing list of loyal clients. I was still working 12-hour days, but now it was different. Now it was mine. One morning, while grabbing coffee before heading to a job site, I overheard 2 guys talking at the counter. One said, "You hear about the Reynolds family? Lost half their properties. Foreclosures all over the place." The name made my stomach twist. Reynolds, Emma's father. I didn't believe it at first, but later that week I confirmed it through a mutual acquaintance. The real estate empire her dad had bragged about, the empire he used to belittle me, was crumbling. Bad investments, market shifts, and debt piled higher than his pride. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt something else, vindication. The same man who smirked at me and asked if plumbing was stable was watching his fortune slip through his fingers, and the irony didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, one of my new clients called with a burst pipe emergency. Guess whose name was on the property paperwork? Reynolds & Co. out in one of Emma's father's rental homes. Standing in that basement, knee-deep in dirty water, I almost laughed out loud. I was cleaning up the literal mess left behind by the man who once said my work wasn't a career. Later that night, I sat at my desk, staring at foreclosure notices I'd pulled up online. One address stood out immediately, the Reynolds family's prized house, the very one where I first sat at their polished dining table, humiliated while they picked me apart, and in that moment, a dangerous idea began to take shape. By the end of that year, my company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had 5 full-time employees, contracts with local builders, and more work than we could handle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just scraping by. I was building something that could outlast me. Meanwhile, news about the Reynolds family spread through town like wildfire. Properties being auctioned off, lawsuits piling up, whispers of bankruptcy in every corner of their social circle. Emma's father, once the man who looked at me like I was dirt under his shoe, was now scrambling to hold on to the very ground beneath him. I won't lie. There was a petty part of me that relished every headline. Every rumor was proof that the empire built on arrogance was collapsing brick by brick. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I was flipping through foreclosure auction listings when I saw it. The Reynolds mansion. Their pride, their status symbol. The same house where her father leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and mocked me about my unstable job. The auction date was circled in red on my calendar before I even realized what I was doing. In the weeks leading up to it, I couldn't stop thinking about that dining room. The polished silverware. Emma's silence as her dad belittled me. The smug looks passed between them like I wasn't even worth defending. Now that house wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was a symbol of everything I endured and everything I had become despite them. When the day finally came, I showed up at the auction with my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was crazy for even being there, but one thing was clear. If I pulled this off, it wouldn't just be a purchase, it would be justice. The courthouse steps were crowded the morning of the auction. Investors in sharp suits, real estate agents with clipboards, and a handful of regular folks hoping for a miracle deal. I stood there in my work boots and a clean button-down, trying to steady my breathing. To anyone else, it was just another property going under the hammer. To me, it was the battlefield where I'd reclaim my dignity. When the auctioneer started, I felt my palms sweating. The opening bid was already high, but not unreachable. I raised my hand, heart hammering in my chest. Each time someone countered, I lifted my hand again, my voice firm. The numbers climbed, but I had prepared for this. Every late night, every emergency call, every dollar I had saved went into this moment. Finally, after a tense back and forth, the hammer dropped. Sold. It took a second for the words to sink in, but when they did, a wave of adrenaline hit me so hard I thought I might collapse. I wasn't just a plumber anymore. I wasn't just the guy Emma mocked at dinner parties. I was the new owner of the Reynolds mansion. As I signed the paperwork inside, I couldn't stop smiling. The clerk probably thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. All I could think about was that dining room table, the exact spot where I once sat. Humiliated, listening to her father lecture me about stability. Now, that table, those walls, those polished floors, they were mine. Walking back out into the sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, vindication. Not just success, but the kind of poetic justice you only see in movies. And as Christmas drew closer, an idea began to form, a way to make sure Emma and her family knew exactly whose roof they'd mocked. By December, the Reynolds' downfall was the talk of the town. Every time I overheard whispers about their finances, I had to bite back a smile. Their mansion, the house I now owned, was sitting under my name. But I hadn't told anyone yet. Not Emma, not her father, no one. I wanted the reveal to be perfect. That's when fate handed me the opportunity. A mutual friend reached out, inviting me to a Christmas dinner where Emma's entire family would be. At first I considered saying no. Why walk back into a room filled with people who had treated me like dirt? But then I realized this was it. The stage I had been waiting for. The night of the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning a crisp white shirt, my nerves buzzing like static. I wasn't the same man who once sat at their table, quiet and ashamed. I was walking into that room on equal ground. No, higher ground. When I arrived, the house was warm with Christmas lights, the scent of pine and roasted ham drifting through the air. Laughter spilled from the dining room as I walked in. The second Emma saw me, her smile faltered. Her father gave a tight nod, clearly less amused by my presence. I kept my cool, greeting everyone politely, even as I caught the subtle smirks and sideways glances. They still saw me as the plumber who didn't belong. Dinner was served, and the conversation turned quickly, as I knew it would. Emma's father, nursing a glass of wine, began lamenting his financial troubles. He shook his head dramatically. "We lost the house. It's humiliating, really. That mansion was everything to this family." I stayed quiet, my fork poised over my plate. My heart pounded, but I knew my moment was coming. And when it hit, it would silence the entire table. The clinking of silverware filled the silence after Emma's father's rant. His voice carried the same arrogance, but now it was coated with self-pity. "That house was our legacy. To lose it in foreclosure? It's disgraceful." He shook his head, staring into his wine glass like it held all the answers. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. For a moment I debated keeping quiet, just savoring the knowledge privately. But no, the time for silence had passed years ago. I set my fork down gently and said, "Funny thing about that house." All eyes turned toward me. Emma stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "What about it?" her father asked, suspicion flashing across his face. I let the silence hang for just long enough, then smiled. "I bought it." The room froze. Fork stopped midair. Emma's jaw dropped, her face draining of color. Her father blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "You what?" "I own it now," I said evenly. "The deed's in my name. So the house you mocked me in, the one where you told me plumbing wasn't a future? Turns out plumbing paid for it." A sharp gasp rippled around the table. Emma's mother set her glass down with a trembling hand. Emma's face twisted, caught between shock and fury. Her father leaned forward, his voice low, almost a growl. "You're lying." I reached into my jacket and slid a folded paper across the table. "The deed." His trembling hands picked it up, scanning the page, and I watched as his expression crumbled into something I'd never seen before. Defeat. The silence in that room was heavier than any insult they had ever thrown at me. And for the first time in years, I felt tall. Taller than all of them. The rest of that dinner felt like living in slow motion. Emma's father sat there, gripping the deed like it might dissolve in his hands if he let go. His face was pale, his jaw tight. Emma avoided my eyes completely, her fork scraping against her plate though she barely ate. The silence was thick, suffocating, broken only by the occasional clink of glass. Finally, Emma's mother cleared her throat, her voice shaky. I suppose congratulations are in order. I gave a small nod, but I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The weight of the moment spoke louder than any insult I could throw back. Emma finally looked at me, her eyes wide, searching. "Why would you do this?" she whispered, like the betrayal was mine. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Because I was never just the plumber. I was the man you dismissed, the man you laughed at. And now, I'm the man who owns the house your father built his pride on. That's what I did." She flinched like the words themselves were knives. No comeback, no defense, just silence. When dinner ended, I walked out into the cold December air, the sound of laughter and holiday music from nearby houses drifting across the street. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not because I'd humiliated them, but because I had finally proven, to myself, that their opinions didn't define me. I had taken every insult, every smirk, every moment of humiliation, and turned it into fuel. The man they mocked as just a plumber was now their landlord, and as I stood there, snowflakes catching in my hair, I realized something. Revenge was sweet, yes. But the real victory was walking away with my head high, knowing I never needed their approval to begin with. I built my future with my own hands. And that, more than anything, was my legacy.